Good afternoon, everybody. I think everybody is now joining our session. I'd like to welcome you all to the city. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers who set up the conference and this panel in particular. So our thanks go to UD Arab and the Mixed Migration Center. Before I introduce the presenters, I would like to remind everybody that please switch off the camera during the presentations to provide for a better internet connection. Everybody is welcome, everybody can join. If you have a question, feel free to put your question in the chat. We will listen to the 6 presentations basically in one go. And then there's gonna be a half an hour Q&A answer session where we hopefully engage in a very productive discussion. I'd also like to remind you that after the session, there will be a networking event. So please feel free to join for this and meet some of our speakers through the platform provided. This is probably everything for the audience. I'd like to welcome our speakers. I think we have gathered a great crew. We have academics, we have NGO and social workers, we have accomplished professors, we have aspiring new academics. We have people from inside Indonesia, but also from other countries such as Malaysia, Singapore, and India. So all of you will have a chance to speak for 10 minutes, and please stick to the time just to be fair to the speakers who are speaking after you. We will be quite strict. If you go over time, you might be muted, so don't risk it. So we're gonna start with Gulinanj from Singapore. She's a professor working at the Nanyang Technical University and presenting us with complementary pathways in refugee integration, and particularly looking at the role of universities. This is going to be followed by a presentation by Oki, talking about healthcare for urban refugees. After this, Roshi is going to speak to us, taking a specific look at refugee women narratives. She's going to be a PhD student very soon. After this, we have 2 speakers, Dia and Nurul. Dia is from Host International, and Nurul is a professor at Jenderal Sudirman University in Surabaya, and they're going to talk about the global compact of refugees in Southeast Asia and how this is playing out. After this, 2 people from the Church World Service, Vina and Rangi, are going to talk about the role of civil society. And last but not least, we have Lillian Fan, co-founder of the Gatanyo Foundation, and her topic is going to be the rights and access to services for refugees in Malaysia. So it's going to be very nice to have a comparative view. Okay, without further ado, please, I hand over to Gulinanj to give her presentation. We're very happy to have you here.
Thank you, Anja. I'll just wait the screen to be shared, my PowerPoint presentation. Yes, I think we're ready to go. Okay, Selamat Siang and warm greetings from Singapore. It's a big pleasure to join you this afternoon. And thank you to organizers, of course. And I would like to take this opportunity to share the work we do under the newly established Center for Asia Pacific Refugee Studies at University of Auckland. But relevant to this workshop team, my focus will be on a specific program we run under CAPERS, which is opening universities for refugees. A little bit background, very short, I would like to share first. OUR was founded in 2015 in Singapore as an educational initiative, and since 2020, it runs as a program under this new center. Its main objective has been to bring together institutions which offer or willing to offer higher education courses, diploma and certificate programs to the displaced peoples in Southeast Asia. Early steps of this effort to support displaced youth in Southeast Asia context took the form of organizing participant-led action-oriented workshops we call 3C Forum, C standing for Collaborate, Create, and Change. And the idea behind was to offer platform to bring refugee communities together with organizations, institutions, and the people who have resources, expertise, influence, and willingness to deliver higher education opportunities. It was participant-led and they were dependent on the dialogue depended on participants' own priorities and aspirations. And themes were discussed in open-ended dialogue sessions to which all participants were invited to attend and speak. Can I have the second slide, please? Since 2016, OUR has hosted 5 3C forums in August 2016 in Malaysia, November 2017 New Zealand, 2018 in Indonesia and Australia, and 2019 in Hong Kong. Third slide, please. Outcome of these forums regarding action plans, which were developed in these country settings, were quite different. In Malaysia, we have developed a 4-week-long certificate program for collaborating with UNHCR and partner universities, and we call it CERTE, Connecting and Equipping Refugees for Tertiary Education. And since 2017, the very first CERTE course, 117 students have received certificates, and 19 of them have been offered admission and scholarship at different universities in KL. This year's CERTE was hosted online due to COVID, and we had 14 new graduates. In Indonesia, after 3C Forum, a private university for the first time opened its doors to refugees and started running supportive programs for the refugee learning centers in Jakarta, which were offering GED diploma programs. Previously as OUR, we offered teacher training workshops in Cisarua by collaborating with the learning centers and Dulwich College in Singapore. The outcome of a 3C Forum in New Zealand was a CERT course, and in Hong Kong, we wanted to concentrate on scholarships, but the follow-ups didn't happen due to COVID. We have recently created a toolkit for those who wish to organize 3C Forum, and last week we offered a training to 27 UNHCR education officers from different countries on how to host these no-cost action-oriented platforms to build new partnership models for the access of refugee students to higher education. I think Mogadishu and Ghana offices are planning to host forums in 2022. The next slide, please. Since 2015, we gave considerable thought to subject of upscaling stakeholder participation, not only 3C Forum, but also a wider university engagement. With nearly 20,000 universities in the world, the thought of convincing each and every one of them to offer support to displaced communities, it was logistically impossible. So instead, we decided to approach the issue from a different trajectory by going directly to the ranking agencies. Together with University Alliance for Refugees and At-Risk Migrants, an initiative based in the United States, we offered a joint pledge to UNHCR in 2019 during Global Refugee Forum. The idea behind was, and still is, that ranking agencies can play a major role in supporting UNHCR's 15 by 30 campaign as new stakeholders. In 2019, UNHCR set the goal to increase refugee participation in higher education from 3% to 15%. As the first step, we decided to approach Times Higher Education, one of the most respected global ranking agencies. It was the same year, actually, 2019, Times Higher Education introduced their social impact rankings, assessing data from universities globally, specifically in context of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. As part of the pledge, we set up a task force, Capers lead that, and now we're changing the language of underrepresented groups, and we added the forcibly displaced, stateless, asylum seeker, former and current refugees. It will be reflected in 2022 rankings. This approach, we believe, will offer a mirror to all higher education institutions for self-reflection regarding their inclusive admission policies. Of course, this is not related only to student admission. Today, there are thousands of academics, our colleagues who are in exile or displaced. With this change in the assessment, lots of universities in Southeast Asia, which are currently at the lower end of scale of rankings, yet which are doing amazing work to support displaced communities, those will be rewarded and recognized. We will continue hosting 3C forums in 2022. The 6th will be hopefully in Erbil, Iraq, with Yazidi refugees in the camps. And the 7th will be in New York, 2022 October with MIU in the World Summit. And hopefully we will do another one in Makassar by partnering with RDI. We're still having discussions on that. The next slide, please. Institutional matchmaking for the near future is a concept which we're currently developing. Through an active online platform by using algorithms, we would like to introduce new university twinning model in order to create blended diploma programs. And these programs will be run by on-site and online partners with these twin universities. Same platform will also aim to secure and coordinate the financial support for these programs by including civil society organizations and private sector donors as other matching partners. So we want to create an algorithmic system that will bring the multi-stakeholders around the world together effortlessly for inclusive higher education. Another partnership program we're aiming to establish is in the United States. This time we would like to work closely with refugee settlement agencies to support their efforts in building new institutional sponsorship models. In April this year, President Biden issued an executive order stating that to meet the challenges of restoring and expanding United States refugee admission program, the United States must innovate by capitalizing on community and private sponsorships. We suggest two campus-based pilot programs, program for colleges and universities directly sponsor refugee students in order to facilitate their continuing education. We are hoping to work this also including community colleges. As one of the core durable solution, as you know, along with local integration and voluntary repatriation, resettlement still remains a principal invaluable tool for international protection to address the needs of refugees. The last slide, please. However, fewer than 1% of all refugees are ever resettled to a safe third country. UNHCR's 3-year strategy on resettlement and complementary pathways set a target to resettle 70,000 refugees to 31 countries in 2020, partially due to suspension of the global resettlement program because of pandemic. Only 20,000 individuals were resettled in third countries in 2020. In official policy terms, local integration is a means to ending exile, but allowing refugees to become full members of host community in their first country of asylum. And there is growing scholarship which examines the importance of refugees' autonomy and centering solutions around belonging, both at local level and through citizenship, and argues that local integration is not so much the forgotten solution, but officially it's forbidden solution, since there are a lot of obstacles from host countries' angles and refugees' willingness and future expectations. Yet in protracted refugee situations, quasi de facto integration is already taking place. And my question is, what type of role universities can play to support both refugee and host communities during this process? Andre, how many minutes I have?
Unfortunately, time is up.
Oh, all right. Okay. Anyways, Q&A, we'll continue with that, with the question. I'm so sorry for taking the time.
Oh, no worries. Thank you very much, Gul. This was very interesting, and I'm sure people will ask you lots of questions. I would like to hand over to Oki, who is going to present us with a psychological perspective on healthcare for urban refugees. Mbak Oki. Mbauki, please unmute yourself. We're listening. We're very keen to hear what you have to say.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine.
Sorry, I have problem with my laptop. Can you give me some minutes to restart it?
Oh, you have a problem. How about we then switch to Roshni and come back to you?
Yes, that's okay.
Roshni, are you able to jump in?
Yeah, just give me a second. I'll just share my screen.
So Roshni is an aspiring PhD candidate, and she's talking about refugee women narratives, the politics of spatiality. Ready whenever you are ready to go.
Yeah, so can I start?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I have already been introduced. So I'm Roshni Sharma. I'm from India doing my PhD on refugee women and identities, especially with the ones who are hosted by the Indian state. So to begin with, I mean, nothing new for all of us, at least to understand that the last century was considered to be the century of refugees. And if one sees it in the present times, the situation is only worsening. And with around 82 million people being forced to flee persecution and violence in until 2020. There is a clear upward trend in the size of the forcibly displaced population. Interestingly, fortunately, unfortunately, there has been a continuous increase despite COVID-19 shutdowns last year. In the year 2020, around 11.2 million people were forced to flee in comparison to the previous year, that is 2019, when 11 million people were forced to flee. Now, out of this population of 82.4 million people who are forced migrants, around 26.4 million people are classified as refugees, and within this also there is further segregation under the AGD and under the AGD criteria, where we talk about gender, where we look at the refugee community through the gender variable. Similar to what we see in the present scenario, the literature that was produced in the 20th century, as Edward said very famously, I mean, he very strongly believed, and he had given his idea of the literature that was produced in the 20th century could be symbolized as the age of refugees. So what we see is that what was happening, the literature that is being produced also replicated what was happening on the ground in the world. Now, we all are familiar with the definition of refugee, and the problem begins with the definition itself. The 5 grounds that is being articulated or that is being highlighted in the 1951 UN Refugee Convention and its additional protocol, namely race, religion, nationality, social group, being a member of the social group, or having a political opinion, actually are concerns or are issues or are they are more present in the public spaces. And the issue rises here where women do not have, I mean, the issues are not talking about, or to get the refugee status, private domain is missing. Where the challenges for women are tremendous. In the larger question that through this particular paper I was looking at, the bigger question that was in terms of, in the backdrop of the larger debate between the us and other. how refugee women, negotiate within the constricted spaces that are available to them in the host country. And interestingly, the larger debate that we're talking about, that is us and the other, in the present times, due to the increase of populist and nativist agenda, there has been a all-time high in categorizing refugees as the other, and it is only the othering is only excavating, is only deepening. To consider them as an outsider, something which an identity that stands against the dominant identity of the citizen, the self. Now, within this backdrop of the self and the other, or us and the other, the us, which is the citizen, is considered to be civilized, superior in contrast to the others. And here, within the debate of the us and the other, gender holds a very significant position. It holds a very significant place, where the women in the process of this othering becomes the othered other. So she is all the more at the margins of being of the margin. So we can see it in from that particular perspective. And therefore, my entire argument is based on how women is being othered. She becomes the othered in the process of othering of the refugees. The methodology that I chose for this particular study is basically purely based on secondary literature. Thanks to COVID, I wanted to go for a primary data collection, but I wasn't able to. And the whole the methodology was based on textual analysis of as a qualitative method, which has been adopted to understand the politics of speciality within the current relevant issues in the specified area of study. Case study as a method has been used and collecting from various secondary sources such as data, articles, narratives of refugee women. And especially for this study, I have looked at the narratives of particularly two dominant refugee groups from Afghanistan and from Bangladesh, who are settled, if we can say so, in Pakistan and Bangladesh respectively. Now, talking about refugee women, in the poster one can see that we are talking about how gender shapes the continents of life in displacement. Not that displacement treats men in any different way, but the very fact that the gender identity or the sex of the women determines her, puts her in a much more vulnerable position. And this intersectionality between the gender identity and the refugee identity kind of adds on to the double marginalization of these women, which comes out very clearly in the literature that has been produced, that has been written on the subject. We see it on the slide, on the poster, that where Afghan refugees, how many of the Afghan refugees are being hosted by Pakistan. Pakistan is the largest, is the country with the largest number of Afghan refugees. Around 1.44 million refugees are being hosted since 1970s. Which
1 minute left.
1 minute left, okay. Which is being, and similarly to what we see in Rohingya. So I'm just quickly coming down to the findings of my study. What we have seen in terms of the what I have collected from the literature, that in both the cases, whether we talk about Rohingya or Afghani refugee women, they have been forced to cope up within the new spaces within both the private and public sphere, which has challenged their role to a larger extent. In some states, in some instances, however, women have also found their agency, which in their public domain have led to other kind of consequences, the increase of domestic violence, because there has been a change in the traditional role of men and women. The refugee women narratives showcase how very powerful and resilient these women are in their everyday life. The interesting point was that women on both these sides, they lack the opportunity to shape the decisions that impact themselves, and it was the men who were taking these decisions, and therefore they argued in the as it is mentioned in the literature, that if you are discussing our future, include us. It has to be with us. It cannot be without us. And we are familiar with the which is very dominant, this gender and sexual based violence in these camps. And interesting, the whole, I don't know how to put it, even whether it is interesting or whether to survive, the whole idea of the survival sex becomes a very important feature in these camps. And that's how some of these women are even earning for their family. It's not that they are doing it out for their own interest or for their leisure, but it is for the survival aspect that they get engaged in these kind of an activity. Now, you see two photos there, two images, one of Rohingyas and one of Afghani refugee women, where they are weaving, they kind of, the traditional work that they have been doing, they feature in here. So to conclude, there are diversification of problems that are faced by these refugee women, and there is an alarming need to encourage leadership amongst these women and to provide them volunteering opportunities, to also ensure safe spaces within the host communities and in their private domains. So I would like to end here, and maybe we can take up this discussion further in the question and round session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roshni, for sticking to time mostly, and also for jumping in. So, okay, how's it going? Has your computer been rebooted? Are you ready to go?
Yes, I'm ready now.
Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm so sorry for my technical issue. Okay, hello everyone. I'm Okino Safitri, and I'm from the University of 17 August 1945, Surabaya, Indonesia. It is an honor to present at this event. Indonesia is one of the most popular destinations for international migrants and refugees in Southeast Asia. This is because Indonesia has become a transit country for foreign refugees who want to seek asylum. In Indonesia, partly refugees and asylum seekers live in urban settings instead of camps. The urban environment coupled with population aging due to protected displacement present complex healthcare needs among the refugee and asylum seeker population. Further, as Indonesia is not a state party of the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees and its 1967 protocol, efforts to address these needs are complicated by numerous legal and political challenges. Before I start my presentation, I want to share my personal experience with my refugee friend. Around in 2015, I met my first refugee friend, and as a friend, we shared a couple of experiences. Knowing his experiences touched my heart. It was the first time that I knew what happened to the world outside there, and I became interested in the particular challenges faced by refugees and asylum seekers. One day, I accompanied my refugee friend to do medical treatment in the hospital. And on that time, I saw that he faced some barriers to access healthcare. Actually, refugee and asylum seekers often encounter circumstances in which their health and well-being are compromised. Despite these health needs, access to healthcare for refugees is often restricted in host countries. The urban environment, coupled with population aging due to protected displacement, present complex healthcare needs among the refugee and asylum seeker population. Actually, there are lots of studies that have long highlighted the challenges that urban refugees and asylum seekers accessing healthcare in Indonesia. In particular, as a psychology major, I was interested in reviewing these conditions from a psychological perspective. Today, I'm presenting qualitative work with semi-structured in-depth interviews conducted on 10 refugees were obtained through the snowball sampling technique that has experience to access healthcare in Indonesia. They are all living in Jakarta, Bogor, Surabaya, Makassar, and also Batam. What I find in this study is the barriers to accessing healthcare among urban refugees and asylum seekers in Indonesia are first language and inadequate interpretation services. Second, limited access to healthcare services, and also the perception of discrimination relating to race, religion, or immigration status. And this situation is usually common in many developing countries that accept the presence of foreign refugees, where policy affects refugee and asylum seekers to access basic services, including legal employment, formal education, and also free healthcare. Another big question is how these conditions can impact the psychological condition of refugees and asylum seekers. There are some psychological consequences as a result of barriers to accessing healthcare services, including stress, anger, frustration, and depression. The feeling of being useless also result from experiences with fighting the system or encountering access difficulties. And these psychological impacts may weaken the individual's motivation to seek care, either to treatment regimen and initiate necessary preventive strategies. Medical mistrust. Medical mistrust is also another consequence result. Patients who don't trust their healthcare providers are labeled as non-compliant and blamed for their failure to benefit from treatment, even though providing opportunities for patients to be involved in the medical treatment process in one of the efforts to reduce medical mistrust, nations where to seek help, and including stigma about healthcare service. The barriers can lead to delay help seeking or failure to seek help, resulting in slow recovery time and can lead to serious events. Refugees and asylum seekers are particularly vulnerable and marginalized group in Indonesia. Despite the availability of healthcare facilities and services in the country, inadequate access to healthcare among refugees and asylum seekers remain a significant problem. Appropriate and timely access to healthcare service is the only way to reduce the barriers to lead to the consequences discussed in this paper, in this, poster. Healthcare providers must become refugee literate to reduce the barriers they encounter. However, refugees need services that help them to maintain function and also to prevent complication, functional decline, and secondary conditions. At the very least, national initiative will raise awareness of disparities in healthcare access for refugee and asylum seekers. This will be an important step towards minimizing the occurrence and severity of consequences experienced by refugee and asylum seeker. I thankful everybody, and I hope this will be a very humble contribution for the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Oki. This was very interesting, and I'm sure we will have a few additional questions for you in the question and answer session. For now, I would like to invite two presenters, Dia and also Ibu Nurul. Ibu Nurul is a professor at Jenderal Sudirman University, and Dia was working as a community engagement officer for Host International. And they have worked together and produced a paper on the impact of the Global Compact of Refugees in Southeast Asia. And they're particularly interested in looking at Indonesia's humanitarian space. So we are very keen to listen to you.
Thank you, Ibu Anja. So Nurul will share her screen at the moment to show us the poster that we have come up with. I think because we have already been introduced by Ibu Anja, so I will just straightforwardly present our poster. So I will not dive in too much into the context of refugees' life in Indonesia because our previous presenters have already provided that context. So we just go straightforwardly discussing about the framework of our research is basically to use a Global Compact on Refugees framework to look at the current practice of refugee protections in Indonesia. And then how does it takes form in a humanitarian space where Indonesian government allow service providers, international organizations like UNHCR, CWS, or other kinds of humanitarian organization to provide basic needs to refugees who is in transit in Indonesia. However, this basic needs only covers so far. So it does not cover the fact that they have they have the rights to access education, they have the rights to be self-reliant, and they also have the rights to pursue a better livelihood, even though with their status as refugee. So and then also we come up with the emphasis on Indonesia international commitment during the UN conference that they reinstate their commitment to refugee protection in Indonesia by stating the commitment to Global Compact on Refugees back on 2018, and they also reinstated the same commitment on 2019. So embarking from this Indonesia commitment, we take the framework of GCR to look at how does the humanitarian space in Indonesia actually take form, and whether it has already expanded after the reinstatement of this commitment in the international level. So our research questions is basically, how has refugee empowerment been implemented as an alternative to humanitarian space in Indonesia, and why do we emphasize on empowerment? Because the highlight of GCR is to give rooms for empowerment and development for refugees in the same quality that local community could get from the government. So in the document, if you have a chance to take a look at, the GCR frameworks includes using phrases like refugees and host communities, which mean the development of these two communities are together. Because as a matter of fact, refugee lives with local communities, although the policies that influence their life is formed by the government, which is very highly political on the upper level. And then the GCR frameworks also include access to education. So the GCR encourages an inclusive national education system from primary to tertiary level. So even from primary school, junior high school, up into the university level. And then it also encouraged economic rights. So not just the opportunity to go to work, but actually the opportunity to get decent work, which also includes an aspect of protection in that. And also it emphasizes also on women and youth empowerment while taking concern of their physical and well-being. And I think this is the highlights, because GCR emphasis on the women and youth empowerment, and we all know Indonesia have a very progressive women and youth empowerment for Indonesian themselves. So there is no, in hindsight, there is no reason why refugee couldn't be included into any kind of program that involves women and youth empowerment in Indonesia. And then when we're talking about the humanitarian space, it's basically a humanitarian operating environment, as I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation. It focused on responding in an emergency humanitarian situation. Thus, it focused on providing basic needs. If we all remembers about the arrival of Rohingya people in Aceh, the Indonesian government responding to that is by allowing them to get into the land of Aceh and allowing UNHCR and allowing Dompet Duafa and other humanitarian organizations to provide their response, which is in the form of basic needs. But afterwards, after that, because they're stuck in Indonesia in a sustained displacement, a different response, a different approach is required. So there's a lot of, I think we all already also aware that there's a lot of questions, big questions asking like, so what next? Because now we have already given them basic needs. So what next? Because they're stuck here. So when we look at that, we have a couple of findings. So we found that Indonesia indeed has issued a presidential decree and respond to their commitment to Global Compact on Refugees. However, this presidential decree only responding to a certain part of GCR. It's only concerning the reception, which is allowing, for example, allowing the Rohingya people to be in Aceh, and then ensuring their safety and security, and then allowing UNHCR and other organizations, humanitarian organizations, to register them and to document their cases, and then to be processed in Indonesia. Afterwards, there's so many gray area of what happens to them, because then the government leaves the responsibility to the humanitarian actors such as UNHCR, IOM, and other organizations to take care of these refugees while they are in Indonesia. And then the second findings is also, we found that Indonesian government, especially the Minister of Education, they have issued a circular letter which encouraged schools in local area or in schools, they can accept refugee children to be enrolled in the school. However, this practice is only known for primary school. And since this is a circular letter, there is no uniform enforcement of the letter. So each of the regional or the provincial government can respond to however capacity they have. They can adhere to that circular letter, or they could just say we don't have the capacity to accept refugee children. And
2 minutes, please.
Sorry, thank you. And then also, I would like to highlight most importantly on the economic rights. Refugees in Indonesia are not allowed to work, so they're highly dependent to aid from organizations, from humanitarian organizations, which is very limited also, and they're also very highly dependent to their saving. But the problem is their saving can only survive so far because they cannot work. So there's also an urgent need to provide economic rights to refugees where they are able to work so that they can be self-reliant. And I think in the context of Indonesia, these needs are the most urgent one at the moment. And then Indonesia should take a look at this as a response to sustained displacement phenomena, because it's no longer transit for just a couple of years, but it's a transit for almost 10 years, and this falls into the category of sustained displacement. So this is an opportunity for Indonesia to take a look at back to their policy framework into a more inclusive one by taking consider into refugees' condition that is trapped in a sustained displacement in Indonesia. I think we're going to leave it at that and then open the opportunity for discussions at the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you both so much, particularly thanks to Dia for presenting us with your findings. Now our next presentation is again by two people who have been working for an NGO in Indonesia. Child World Service has been for many years the implementing partner for the UNHCR. And we're very keen to hear what Vina and Rangi have to tell us today.
All right, thank you, Anje. Let me share my screen first. Okay, can you see my screen now? All right.
Yes,
okay, so a moment. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I would like to introduce myself again. I'm Rangi, and I'm the social worker for the CWS Indonesia, and my partner, Vina Sancia Arindi, Sasa. She's also one of the social worker for CWS Indonesia. And for today, we are going to presenting our research, the role of civil society in empowering refugee community in Jakarta greater area. So yeah, as we already know that Indonesia is one of the countries that in the world that has not been signing the UN Convention of the Refugee. And the problem, it's become more complicated because in Indonesia, we have limited regulation regarding this issue. So it's kind of, we confuse how to deal, how to handle this situation, or even how to treat the refugee or asylum seeker that are coming to Indonesia. As the mentioned before by the previous speakers, we only have one specific regulation, which is the presidential regulation number 125 year 2016. So yeah, we could agree that there is a lack of regulation in our countries, in Indonesia, regarding this issue. The thing is, we have a quite lot of asylum seekers and refugee in Indonesia. The latest data that we got from the UNHCR Indonesia, we have around 13,000 refugees and asylum seekers in Indonesia. And yeah, indeed, it's not that big. It's not that much if we compare with our neighbors countries such as Malaysia or Thailand. However, this number is still a significant number. 13,000, it's still a significant number of the human population. This issue is one of the issue that not getting enough attention from our government and the people of the Indonesian itself. So some people might think that this issue does not exist in Indonesia. If we ask our friend, if we ask our family, they might don't know what refugee is, what asylum seeker is, how they ended up in Indonesia, what they're doing here, and so on and so on. So basic, beside the lack of the regulation, there's also lack of awareness, if I could say, lack of awareness of the people of the Indonesia regarding this issue. And because of that, the refugee and asylum seekers become one of the population that are suffers. They're not, they have no place to stay. Some of them are homeless, and the kids cannot access the education. Some of them can access, but it's very limited kids that can access the education. And also they cannot access the healthcare system, and they don't have a chance to the employment opportunities because it's illegal for them to work here in Indonesia. And as I mentioned earlier, we are not having a legal, we are not having enough legal instrument how to handle this situation. And our government seems like not interested on this issue. So, however, me and my partner, Sasa, we saw a few movement, a few civil initiative that are contributes on this issue. We know some of the organizations that are working to help the refugees and asylum seekers in Jakarta. So basically, this is the simple, this research is quite simple actually. This is a qualitative research aimed to describe about the civil society movement who are helping the refugees. We want to tell the people that even though we are not having enough legal instrument, we are still having another way. We are still having another platform to help the refugee, and it didn't stop us to help or to taking care of each other. So we want to raise the awareness of this issue, and perhaps we might learn from the best practices that has been done by this organization. Over to you, Sasa.
Okay, thank you, Rangi. Can you please zoom in the poster a little bit?
Sorry.
Zoom it in. Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. Yep. Okay, so as Rangi mentioned, we are going to analyze from different perspectives, not what should the government do, not what can the government do, but here we are going to see that what actually has been done by the civil society and also what can we do actually as an individual. So here we analyze 3 civil society organizations, which are Church World Service and then Chisholm Refugee Learning Center, Hub for Refugee, and one more is a social enterprise, which is Liberty Society. This is interesting why we put a social enterprise among this civil society organization, because the practice itself conducted by Liberty Society is also intersect with the practice that can be done by civil society organization. Okay, so let's dive into the first one, which is Church World Service. CWS partnering with UNHCR. It provides health services for refugees in Jabodetabek. Moreover, it also has shelter for unaccompanied and separated children who come to Indonesia without parents, without relatives, as well as the women at risk. They provide monthly allowance as well as education access for the beneficiaries. Moreover, the class is conducted by CWS. The teachers are taken from the refugee community itself. They also give an opportunity for interpreter to help the organization. It also collaborate with another civil society organization, for example, like Dompet Duafa, to provide, to enlarge the education access that can be accessed by the kids. Like Madia before mentioned that some of public schools are able to get in some children, some refugee children, and one of the actors that is involved in it is Dompet Duafa, UNHCR, and also CWS. And then let's go to Cisarua Refugee Learning Center. This is one of the pioneer of refugee-led learning center in Bogor, in West Java. It has a program, American-based GED program, which later on, when the student graduate or complete this program, they can use the certificate to access higher institution in the country they are resettled in. And then Help for Refugee is also a refugee-led learning center, but not only giving the non-formal education, it also giving a workshop regarding health info session. Yeah, so the community itself can understand more about the health. They can be more aware with the health of their health, basically. And then the last one is Liberty Society. The social enterprise works on ethical, sustainable fashion industry. In this social enterprise, many women refugees can be empowered through training in making clothes, in making clothes which are sustainable and ethical. So this is a very visionary social enterprise actually. So by being involved in this social enterprise, the refugee can get more skill, knowledge regarding making the fashion itself, as well as later on when the Liberty Society sold the product, the profit will be divided. So refugee that made the clothes will get the profit itself. This will be very beneficial for them because the woman work there is not only gaining the skill but also earning for the living of their family itself. Okay, and based on these 4 good practices, we can see that they have a very significant role in helping refugee to gain their basic rights. They provide the services and then they become the catalyst or the bridge between other civil society, and also it also can state actor, well, I can say that. And then it also can become one of the platform where the community can be empowered. So these good practices show us that we can do something. We are able to do something beyond the government itself, because we cannot just waiting for the government, because every day does matter. The refugees just like us, right? Refugee rights are human rights. They are human beings just like us. And we cannot treat them as an emergency response here, because this issue cannot be solved in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but it's supposed to be treated in long-term and in daily basis. And we would like to invite all of us here to work together to support the civil society and also social enterprise to uphold the need of refugee, because we are Indonesian, live in the same area with refugee. We share the same food from the same land. We share the same air for the same land. We share water from the same land. So that let's move together in helping our brother and sister. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vina and Rangi, for your interesting presentation and for the details that you managed to collect and that you were able to share with us. So our final speaker for today is Lillian Fan. Lillian Fan is from the Gitan Yao Foundation, and for the last couple of years, she has done really great work for Rohingya refugees, not only in Malaysia, but also in Aceh, Indonesia. And today she's going to speak to us about expanding rights and access to services in Malaysia. Please, Lillian.
Thank you so much, Ancha. I would like to give a perspective here from a neighboring country to Indonesia, here in Malaysia, but I think that it has a lot of relevance actually to any host country which is currently hosting refugees, and particularly those who have not either signed the convention or do not actually have domestic refugee protection frameworks. And I'm going to basically present, you know, what I think and what we think at the Catania Foundation needs to shift in terms of focus to expand rights as well as access to services. Malaysia is one of the countries in Southeast Asia that hosts quite a large number of refugees. We have registered with UNHCR around 179,000 plus refugees who are registered with UNHCR cards or letters, some type of UNHCR document. There are at least tens of thousands more who are not yet registered with UNHCR, but are likely to be persons of concern, either asylum seekers or refugees as well. The vast majority of these people of concern in Malaysia are from Myanmar, but we actually have refugees and asylum seekers from over 25 countries. So a very wide and diverse group of persons seeking some form of international protection in Malaysia. I think it's probably for all of you who are joining this, you probably know that Malaysia is one of the countries as well that has not signed the Refugee Convention. But a lot of the discussion and advocacy that's been taking place in Malaysia has actually been around that policy level. It's been around trying to push for advocating, you know, for the development of policy either to sign the 1951 Refugee Convention or to try to develop domestic frameworks, domestic legal frameworks that would be able to offer legal entitlements and legal rights to refugees in Malaysia. Because of the quite unstable political situation in Malaysia, but also I think in addition to that, this is also very relevant for all of our contexts. Currently, the COVID-19 crisis and the fact that COVID-19 has actually affected everyone in all of our societies. And here in Malaysia, the inequities between you know, persons who had more security and persons who had less security actually cut across many different groups, that cut across nationalities, that cut across you know, whether one was a citizen or not a citizen. But it also really displayed the fact that, you know, it brought to the forefront the fact that there's a lot of exclusion and that there are, in fact, groups of people in Malaysia, including refugees, but also including particular undocumented migrants, who actually were already struggling with access to certain services and in particular, access to health services. And that really came to the forefront, you know, last year and has continued somewhat through this year as well, even through the vaccination campaign, because we can see that there's a complexity and there's a nexus of, you know, laws that grant documentation and recognition of status, and the ability to access services such as health, and not just the ability to access, but also the basically the level of security that people feel in even coming forward to access those services, even when they're available. So in Malaysia, when the COVID-19 pandemic was just announced, the government actually came up with a very good and inclusive policy, which was anybody with symptoms, regardless of nationality, could get tested for free and treated for free. This was a very good initial policy, but then what we saw is actually contradictory practices that started to undermine those inclusive statements. And that included basically immigration crackdowns on undocumented migrants at the same time when people had just started to come forward to do testing, and we had clusters that involved you know, both citizens as well as non-citizens, including undocumented persons, some of them refugees as well. So we've had very mixed messages. And I think what this has shown as well is it's very difficult to actually try to guarantee and expand access to services when you're not expanding access to rights at the same time. But what we've also seen is that effective access to services also happens not only due to big national policy like signing a convention. In terms of on the health services, that's probably been one of our best sectors. We've moved ahead in the health sector to expand access to services for refugees, not just with the COVID-19 response, but actually over many years. So already the health ministry in Malaysia for many years already has been granting access to refugees and asylum seekers, actually anyone. I mean, there's really, the health facilities in Malaysia do not deny access to actually come and get treatment. But what becomes a problem then is maybe not having the right documentation. There is a circular that states that health officials should be reporting undocumented migrants. It usually doesn't happen, but there's still the directive there. But thankfully, it doesn't always happen. But secondly, also that the rate is extremely high. So very prohibitive fees because for all foreigners, regardless of whether they're undocumented, whether they're a migrant or a refugee, because there's no recognition of the vulnerability of refugees or even of the status of refugees, they are basically asked to pay the foreigner's rate, which is extremely high, even at a government hospital. And it could be sometimes hundreds of times, the cost of a service that a local person would pay, for the same service. UNHCR was able already quite some years ago to develop an agreement with the Ministry of Health to allow for a 50% discount for those people who have UNHCR cards or even now UNHCR letters. So that has been a big help. But of course, then it's interrelated with other forms of restrictions and policies, such as the inability to access legal employment and the lack of legal work rights, basically, for refugees. That becomes one of the biggest challenges in terms of the ability of refugees to pay for any type of service, even when the service is actually made available. So these are all challenges which I think many of us are familiar with at the national level. However, I think that what we're starting to see is actually the importance of taking the discussion down to local levels, subnational levels. This is, of course, very relevant as well to Indonesia, to actually start talking much more to state governments, to municipality levels and to district levels, and to work with different types of actors, including members of parliament within their constituencies, looking at municipal authorities, looking at trying to find ways of looking overall at the types of services that are available in a state and in a particular territory, and finding ways of expanding those. And there have already been some small signs that there's a willingness of certain states, of certain municipalities and certain districts, and definitely with the leadership and as well in support of certain parliamentarians, to try to look at approaches that are much more inclusive, that are responding to a case of vulnerability that everybody is suffering from, and trying to look at plans to support recovery that is actually inclusive. And I think that's the next big challenge, to actually look at the national recovery plans from COVID-19 and frame it in a way where we can talk about inclusiveness and where we're not talking about status anymore. So trying to shift those dialogues, trying to look at where the private sector can come in and play a role, where not just humanitarian, but also development actors can come in and play a role. In Malaysia, we don't have a lot of international humanitarian actors. It's not a country which has had a lot of large-scale humanitarian disaster. We have a lot of local capacity. So I think, but still, there are a lot of development actors here as well. And I think supporting in a way that can help to frame those discussions and link them as well with initiatives, that are taking place at the global level. I mean, all of this has been very much discussed within the framework of the Global Compact on Refugees as well. So I do think that there are a lot of opportunities to try to build new types of partnerships and collaboration at the subnational level, even as we are continuing to support an advancement of dialogue on policy at the national level.
Thank you very much, Lillian. This was spot on and just in time. So thank you all again for presenting us with your findings. You have both highlighted on a number of specific problems, but some of you have actually also pointed out two opportunities and a way forward. And I think this is something we should probably engage in throughout this discussion. We now have about 30 minutes, and I would like to invite all the participants. We are now 74, which is a lovely number, to please write short questions or comments in the chat box. If it's a general question, just write the question. If you would like to hear an answer from a specific speaker, please maybe point out who you would like to answer your question. So while some of you might still be thinking of questions, I will take the right or the privilege of the moderator and ask a general question to you. And it's pretty much based on the description that we are probably all in agreement that refugees are here to stay in specific countries that you are living in, that you're working on. They're not going anywhere at the moment. Resettlement quotas probably for the time in the near future will remain very low in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and India. So, as some of you have already pointed out, transit is becoming an increasingly longer period of time. It requires different measures. It requires different approaches from the state and also from non-state organizations. Now, you have shared with us your findings, and you were generous to present it today in this forum. But I would like you to reflect a little bit about other communication channels that you might have built in the past. Where else do you share your finding? Who wants to listen? Where do you have made positive experiences? Where was your message well received? Where did maybe people from the government, from the local governments, from civil society were keen to listen? And which approaches maybe did not work out so well? And maybe you can even speculate on why that was the case. So, maybe we can start with this question, and Han from the MLE also has a question from the Mixed Migration Center, also has a question to the presenters. She's interested in finding out more about a safe space for refugees. Yeah. The question is in the chat box. What are the most important elements of that safe space, of this concept that has been developed, and what can be done to create and promote it? So who wants to be the first to have a go on reflecting a little bit more about the strategic communication channels, what works, what doesn't work outside of academic circles, maybe?
Ibu Anja, I think I could share a little bit of my stories on strategic communication. About a month ago, I was in contact with the local people who has been living very closely with refugees in Bogor area. And the reasons why we're communicating is because she has this idea of involving refugees into an empowerment project concerning about food security and waste management. And there's this one question that I asked: why are you interested in involving refugees? And it's very interesting because she told me, like, I've been living amongst them in Bogor for quite some time, for more than 5 years. And as I get to know them, they're just the same. So there's no reason why I couldn't communicate with them the way I communicate with my Indonesian colleague. So there's a lot of the reflections of myself is there's a lot of the reluctancy of knowing refugees comes from the aspect of not knowing what refugees are. So when I listen to Roshni representation about us versus other, there's also this aspect of othering from people who have not even know what refugee actually is. So I think connecting to Han's questions about safe space is for service provider who, or people like me at least, who have already the prior knowledge about refugees, is to create an opportunity for interaction so that more people knows about refugees, but also ensuring within this opportunity, you make sure that you respect humility, equality, those kind of principles, so that everyone feel the safety that it's okay for them to share their story and it's okay for them to engage. And I think I'm speaking more on the local community, so those who are not part of the government officer, because that's another story to discuss.
I would like to add to what Dia said, and Roshni's, Dia's, Nurul Aziz's, Vina's, and Rangi's. There were lots of overlapping, including Lillian and myself, what we introduced. So going back to the Global Compact for Refugees, there is a very important concept being introduced there, whole society approach. And there was a reason for that. And this whole society approach, of course, won't come overnight, won't come with one policy change. It's a kind of a very long-term process. And it starts with the national education system, with the national curriculums. And for this, again, I'm bringing the the conversation back to the role of university, but I know in Thailand, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Singapore, in Southeast Asia, actually majority of the the countries in the world, the national curriculum systems are mostly being designed by the experts of faculty of education in the universities. And they play a major role when it comes to the design, and it's very political. It's official history when when we look at that. So I think we need to create new official histories. I mean, as a historian, I've never thought that I'm going to say this thing, but I am saying that in a way. And this needs to come with not only looking at the past and the current situation, but projecting for the future and concentrating on climate change and global warming. Because any one of us can become displaced in the future. So taking the focus on the future and introduce certain concepts like who's refugee, who's internally displaced, who's stateless, who's asylum seeker, embedded from starting from primary school education and up to higher education. We have to normalize certain terms, and through this we perhaps project and understand that in 21st century we still live in the 19th century nation state concept of embedded in our societies. And and it was not like that, and it won't be the same. So we, as humanity, we're going through the passages. Every one of us in our families, grandfathers, they were migrants, they were refugees. So it's not the way we define as a kind of a crisis creates a big problem, I believe. So we need to change the wording. We need to change. We need to project for future. And it has to come with a whole society approach, not for, yes, we want legislative changes and everything, but if legislative changes come without reflecting to the society, then other problems will appear. So I'll stop here.
Thank you. There was a specific question which I think was Roshni, and this is connected to the latest events we witnessed in Afghanistan. And Kusumata Sharma wants to know, how should India prepare, or what kind of stance should they take in case there is a major outflow of Afghan refugees that as many people have expected. But I suppose this question could also be extended to Indonesia. I suppose some of the governments are worried that there might be more Afghans coming. What is your take? What do you think? What would be the best way to welcome them or to integrate them? Are there any specific ideas? And I also would like to ask a very specific question to Lillian, because you have concentrated so much on healthcare in Malaysia and assessing it, and particularly pointing out that there is this kind of rip-off, the overcharging or for services. Do you think that a kind of a community-based model, or let's say a public insurance scheme that is available, for example, in Indonesia, where people pay monthly fees, in order to get basic healthcare could also be a model for Malaysia. Would it be a way forward to have these kind of systems set up where refugees are allowed to join these insurance schemes? Is this something that people have been discussing, or has it been maybe ruled out because of reasons that might not be visible at first? I would also like to point out that there's a number of questions from Bilal Devancha for each of us. I won't read it out for the sake of time, but please have a look and see whether there's something you would like to respond to. We first maybe start with Roshni.
Yeah, thank you for the question. These, like what we have been discussing, Indonesia, Malaysia, they are not signatories to the 1951 convention, and so is the case of India. In the absence of any regulation in terms of how to take these refugees in, and especially the 2019 Citizenship Amendment Act that was passed by the present government, the situation has become a little much more complex than what we have seen in the previous years. Now, coming to the Afghan refugee situation, India already is hosting around, the registered Afghan refugees, around 20,000 of them. But otherwise, there are 40,000 refugees. As per the UNHCR mandate, 20,000 Afghan refugees are registered. Now, the issue is that this whole CA, with the coming up of this CAA thing in place, the Indian government has regulated a policy whereby it is willing to take in refugees from 3 of the neighboring countries, including Afghanistan, but the minorities from these, the religious minorities from these nations. So therefore, it is very soon, there are refugees coming in, definitely from Afghanistan in the present scenario, what is happening in that particular region. But the issue is that the government is not going to be very open with the religious majority, the Muslim, the Afghan, that majority in terms of taking in refugees, because in the as per the new regulation, it has been very clear in terms of taking religious minority groups from these 3 regions, namely Hindus, Sikhs, Jains. They have categorized the religious identity of these groups and then trying to take in, so that again there was a lot of debate with respect to this particular stance of the government. But yeah, it is too early to comment on anything, the refugees that are flowing in from Afghanistan, but the ones which are already there, the government has really not been able to do quite a bit for them, and there were agitations and protests outside the UNHCR office in terms of providing them basic necessities and a better livelihood within the Indian state. As coming from the civil society organization, a group named MAP, Migration and Asylum Project, I know for sure they have been working with these Afghan refugee women, where in any of the conferences that is being organized, they provide catering services, and these women are they get their due. So in that ways, a little is done from these civil society organizations, these NGOs, but from the government side, still there hasn't been much thing. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Thank you. Lillian, would you like to answer about public insurance schemes? Is that something you would like to maybe elaborate on?
Yes, of course. I can see there's also there's a very specific question to me about Remedy. So Remedy was a scheme, as rightly stated by the participant here, Brian, that basically was developed by RHB Bank, and UNHCR had a partnership with them. And it was actually a very good scheme, in the absence of anything else. And many of us were, in fact, encouraging purchasing of that scheme. And even Gatanio Foundation and some of the other organizations here, we would try to raise sponsorship so that we could get refugee families and individuals covered by this. Unfortunately, it has not been continued for various reasons. I think RHB found that it wasn't a sustainable program for them. There were a lot of basically payouts, But there have been a few alternative schemes. Unfortunately, they haven't been endorsed by UNHCR. So there's something called merchant trade, which some refugees, they actually have a financial service with a card that you can access, because it's also difficult even for refugees here to get access to a bank account. So in the absence of that, there have been some other types of financial services, and merchant trade is one of these services where there is actually a card that's available. Many refugees now use it because they can't open a normal bank account. They have an insurance scheme. However, upon assessment that HCR has done and a comparison of these two schemes, it's actually not as beneficial to refugees. It doesn't cover families, for example. You don't have, like Remedy had a family scheme and an individual scheme, and you just pay a bit more for the family scheme. For merchant trade, you have to pay for every single person within that family, and it's already higher even for one person. So you're paying, really much, much more for an entire family. And some refugee families tend to be quite large as well, because, when they do come to Malaysia, many times they're coming for family reunification. So they actually bring, many members of the family. It's not like migrant workers who are coming here, just to work. So it's quite difficult. It also doesn't cover as many, types of treatments as Remedy did. It's up to refugees if they want to do that, but I think, there's also the responsibility to keep people informed about what their choices are. But it is true. There isn't really a great alternative at the moment, and there have been some discussions. I probably can't share too much of them because they're not really official yet, but there's a lot of thinking going on about this, and there are lots of actors who are trying to find ways of being very innovative and looking at ways that you don't even really need to give an identity document. You can just scan a QR code and have some kind of form of registration that that this is a human being, and therefore you have access to at least some form of insurance. There's a lot of this type of thinking, but getting innovative practices, also initiatives up to scale to actually meet the need is another step, and it's another challenge. But I think that at the bottom of it, even the health ministry recognizes that the problem is not actually the access to healthcare. The problem is the access to work rights. And if refugees were allowed to work, there's always, of course, that negotiation of the foreigners' fees and all of that you could still try to negotiate on. But ultimately, until refugees are actually allowed the right, to legal employment, this is going to be a very big issue.
Thank you, Lily. And I would like to ask Oki what her thoughts are on a public state-funded health insurance scheme. And after this, I would like to invite Rangi and Veena once again to maybe address the questions that you have been asked. And I would also like to extend the opportunity to Nurul, because we haven't heard from you at all. And I'd like to give you the opportunity to address some of the questions. If we don't have enough time to talk about or discuss all the questions, don't you be worried. There's going to be a follow-up with each of the questions to the presenters to make sure that none of your good ideas will get lost. So please, Oki.
Okay, thank you very much. These questions come from Bilal Dewansha. Thank you so much for the question. Actually, based on my experience about refugee, they have enough knowledge about mental health because there are also psychoeducation about mental health that they got from the organizations. But sometimes they still don't understand much about the symptoms of mental disease. They can notice that they are not unwell, they are not well on the body. That is the point that they feel it, but they don't think that can relate to the mental health issue or something like that. But at least that is very good, because once they can recognize what they feel, even though on their body, they are trying to looking for help to come to the healthcare, and then they follow what the healthcare provider said. But the problem is sometimes they feel like what they got from the healthcare providers is not as they want, such as like they think that this is a serious symptoms, but sometimes the hospital or the doctor doesn't take it very seriously. That's why they feel regret about that. So
Okay.
about the strategy, about the strategy, sometimes they know that they can understand about depression. So how they resolve it is like they try to open the space, like make a new friend with the local. But sometimes it can be good if they can meet good people, but it can be unlucky too if they are not meet the the good friends. So it can be a new problem for them. But you know, this is life. They do understand their position, but as a human, they are thinking that they are not a burden in this country. So what's make them feel unwell?
Okay, we only have 4 minutes. Would it be okay to hand over to the next person?
Oh, okay. Yes, please.
Thank you. Rangi, you have a 1 minute elevator pitch, and so do you, Vina. 1 minute.
All right, so I think there's an interesting question from Mbak Teresa about the current situation in Afghanistan and how the civil society respond this. I mean, the civil society in Indonesia respond this situation. I mean, there is probably the increasing of the number of the refugee who are coming to Indonesia because of the current situation of the Afghanistan. But however, we saw that this is the complex and this is a complex situation. We cannot only rely on the civil society or civil movement on this issue. I mean, we still saw the important roles of the government to answer if it's really happened in Indonesia, because as we already as I said before, that we still have a limited kind of illegal instrument on this particular issue. So we think that the government is really having a good roles on this issue beside the civil society movement, I think.
Thank you, Rangi. Vina, what's your take?
Yeah. For Bilal question regarding what's government's response regarding the refugee who work in Indonesia, well, basically, we are not the expert of legal point of view, but here we know that the government itself has not given any restriction for, they do not resist the practice that has happened, because I think civil society here also utilized the opportunity to use the correct term in helping the refugee itself. So instead of giving a job opportunity, they give a livelihood opportunity. Instead of giving salary, they give an allowance or an allowance compared to salary. So basically, we need to play clever regarding this issue, because we can see there are some gaps between the legal instrument and also the practice here, and therefore civil society and related actors, non-state actors, here we can play in that gaps to help the refugee in achieving their rights.
Thank you, Vina, for pointing out that it always requires a smart strategy to win people over. Ibu Nurul, I let you have the final say for this session.
Final. Thank you very much, Bu Anca. Thank you, Pak Bilal, for your question about how the Indonesian government would follow up with the GCR. So I want to connect our answer with the discussion earlier by Vina and Rangi about civil society. I believe that GCR provides a guideline of how to improve the existing governing. And by governing, I don't mean only the policy by the government, but also the alternative, the way that refugees can access their rights, and here where the civil society comes in. And I completely agree with Gul, who said earlier that the GCR idea of whole society approach can actually not be realized overnight. It takes time, and I'm interested in Gul's ideas about education because I'm an educator myself. We have class of migration politics in our department. And I've been teaching this for years. We have a number of students. Well, I have faith that it to some extent it raised also awareness to my students. Because there are more reflective approaches in which after they learn they should think about what they could do with the society, something like that. Furthermore, I think the question is what this network of actors, the governments, the civil society, the individuals that are concerned with the issue can do more to make what Vina and Rangi said, I don't know what you said. I said alternatives or the access to rights for the refugees can be pushed to be more holistic and not so much sporadic as we see it today in Indonesia. Thank you very much. I think that's.
Thank you all. I would really like to thank all the presenters for sharing their findings and their ideas with us, but I'd also like to thank the audience for providing us with interesting questions. And as I said before, none of your questions will be lost, but RDI will follow up and connect people with people who can maybe provide an answer. So nothing is lost. And there's also a networking opportunity coming up in 1 hour. So for those who have time, who have more pressing issues to ask, or who just want to socialize, please reconnect at 3:30 Jakarta time through the Gather Town, which is an application that you can find here in the chat box. So once again, thank you all for sticking to times. Thank you for giving us like the condensed messages that we can take home and reflect upon. And yeah, I hope to see you all very soon, maybe even in real life. Thank you.
Thank you.